There are names in music history that feel like monuments: Elvis Presley, Johnny Cash, Willie Nelson. They are giants. Their stories carved into the very bedrock of our culture. We know their songs, their faces, their triumphs, and their tragedies. But what if I told you that behind one of the most powerful, soul-stirring anthems ever performed by Elvis was a man whose name has been almost completely lost to the wind, a ghost in the machine of American music? This isn't a story about a one-hit wonder. It's about a master craftsman, a poet with a guitar, whose fingerprints are all over the music you love, even if you never knew he was there. He was a man who mentored legends, who turned down the spotlight, and who quietly revolutionized songwriting from the shadows. He saw the glitz and glamour of fame for what it was, a gilded cage, and he chose a different path, a path of art, of integrity, and of quiet truth. This is the story of the most important songwriter you've likely never heard of. This is the story of Mickey Newbury. Mickey Newbury was born Milton Sims Newbury Jr. on May 19, 1940, in Houston, Texas. His parents were Mamie Ellen Taylor and Milton Newbury. He grew up close to his younger brother Jerry, and the two stayed tight throughout their lives. Houston in the 1940s and 1950s was a mix of Southern traditions and new sounds. The city had strong influences from gospel music in churches, blues from local spots, and country tunes on the radio. Young Mickey heard it all, from old hymns to the emerging rock and roll coming out of nearby Memphis. As a kid, Mickey showed an early interest in stories and words. He started writing poetry, which he later turned into song lyrics. By his teenage years, he was serious about music. He taught himself guitar, often shutting himself in his room to practice and write. He soaked up different styles, including doo-wop, gospel, blues, country, and rockabilly. At around 14 or 15, he formed a vocal group called the Embers. They sang tenor parts in doo-wop and gospel, and even opened for big names like Sam Cooke and Johnny Cash. The group had some local success, performing at clubs and events. Mickey also tried earning money by singing solo in Houston clubs and reading his poetry at coffee houses. He absorbed the music scene around him, dissecting songs to understand their structure and emotion. School wasn't his focus. Mickey dropped out of high school to chase music full-time. In 1959, at age 19, he joined the U.S. Air Force to avoid the draft and get some structure. He served for 4 years, mostly stationed in England. The military put his music on pause, but he kept writing in his spare time. He got discharged in 1963 and returned to Texas with a stronger drive to make it as a songwriter. Back home, Mickey faced the realities of starting a career. He had a young family to support. His first child, Joe, was born around this time. To make ends meet, he took odd jobs, including working on shrimp boats along the Gulf Coast. He lived simply, sometimes sleeping in his 1954 Pontiac as he traveled through Texas, Tennessee, and Louisiana. He played small gigs at bars and clubs, testing out his songs and building connections. During this period, he wrote a lot, focusing on personal stories with raw emotion. He tried different band setups like rockabilly groups, but always came back to solo guitar and voice. His goal was clear: get to Nashville, the center of country music, where songwriters could pitch to big artists. In 1964, Mickey made the move to Nashville, Tennessee. It was a big step for any aspiring musician. The Nashville scene was dominated by the Nashville sound, smooth, pop-influenced country with strings and choirs, aimed at wide sales. Individual styles often got toned down for hits, but Mickey's talent stood out. He landed a job at Acuff Rose Music, a top publishing house, for $50 a week. This gave him a steady spot to share his songs with industry pros. That same year, he released his first single, Who's Gonna Cry When I'm Gone. marking his entry as both a writer and performer. Artists started noticing his work, setting the stage for his breakthroughs. In 1968, he achieved something almost unheard of. Within a single year, he had 4 top 5 hits on 4 different charts, all recorded by other artists. There was the psychedelic rock smash, Just Dropped In to See What Condition My Condition Was In, for Kenny Rogers, and the First Edition, a song so vivid in its depiction of an LSD trip that Jimi Hendrix himself loved to play it. On the country chart, Don Gibson had a hit with the achingly sad, funny, familiar, Forgotten Feelings. On the R&B chart, Solomon Burke scored with Time is a Thief. And on the pop chart, Andy Williams took Sweet Melinda into the easy listening stratosphere. This was the Nashville dream. Mickey Newbury had proven he could write anything for anyone. He was a chameleon, a hit maker. He should have been on top of the world. But he was miserable. He saw how the Nashville machine worked. A songwriter would bring in a song, a simple demo with a guitar and a voice, and hand it over. The producer would then assemble session musicians, add syrupy strings, saccharine backing vocals, and churn out a product. The original soul of the song, the raw, fragile emotion that gave it birth, was often lost in the process. For Newbury, this wasn't just a frustration, it was a violation. He believed a song's atmosphere, its mood, was as important as its lyrics and melody. He heard sounds in his head, the sigh of the wind, the patter of rain, the distant whistle of a train that were part of the story. And no one in Nashville was interested in recording the rain. This conflict came to a head when he decided to record his own album. His first record, Harlequin Melodies, was a victim of the very system he despised. The production was conventional, the arrangements safe. It didn't sound like him. It was a failure in his eyes, and it barely made a ripple commercially. He was deeply disillusioned, on the verge of quitting Nashville altogether, of giving up on the dream. He felt like an outsider, a poet trapped in a factory. And this is where the story takes a turn. This is where Mickey Newbury, the forgotten man, makes a decision that would not only define his career, but would also send shockwaves through the foundations of country music. He decided that if no one would record his songs the way he heard them, he would do it himself no matter the cost. He retreated. He found a broken-down houseboat on Old Hickory Lake outside Nashville and made it his home and his sanctuary. Away from the noise and politics of Music Row, surrounded by the gentle lapping of the water, he began to write and rethink everything. It was here, in this floating hermitage, that he began to forge a sound that was entirely his own. In 1969, he walked into a studio with a vision. He was going to record his second album, Looks Like Rain, but this time there would be no compromise. He paid for the studio time out of his own pocket, using royalty money from his earlier hits. This gave him complete creative control. The record label, Mercury, wanted another album from him, but they had no idea what he was about to deliver. What he created was revolutionary. Looks Like Rain opens not with a guitar chord or a drum beat, but with the sound of a gentle, persistent rain shower. For nearly a minute, that's all you hear. It was a statement of intent. He was inviting the listener not just to hear a song, but to enter a world, to feel a mood. The music that follows is sparse, atmospheric, and breathtakingly intimate. His voice, a weary, beautiful baritone, sounds like it's coming from the other side of a lonely room. The songs are meditations on loss, memory, and the passage of time. There are stories that the recording sessions were almost magical. To get the perfect sound, Newbury and his co-producer, Neil Wilburn, experimented endlessly. They placed microphones in strange places. They blended sounds together. The rain you hear wasn't a stock sound effect from a library. They spent hours recording actual rain, finding the perfect texture. The result was an album that felt less like a collection of songs and more like a single, seamless, 34-minute piece of art. It was a folk symphony, woven together with the sounds of nature. When he delivered the master tapes to Mercury Records, they were horrified. Where were the hits? Where were the drums? Why were there all these weird sound effects between the songs? They didn't know how to market it. It fit into no category. It was too folk for country, too country for rock. It was simply Mickey Newbury. The album was a commercial flop, but for a small, devoted group of listeners and fellow musicians, it was a revelation. It was a declaration of independence. One of those musicians was a young, struggling songwriter named Kris Kristofferson. Kristofferson, then working as a janitor at a Nashville studio, would listen to Newbury's demos and be completely floored. He once said, "I learned more about songwriting from Mickey Newbury than from anybody else. He was my hero and still is." He saw in Newbury a kindred spirit, someone who valued poetry and truth above all else. Newbury's courage to create looks like rain on his own terms gave artists like Kristofferson the courage to fight for their own vision. He was the quiet catalyst for what would become the outlaw country movement, a rebellion against the Nashville machine, led by figures like Willie Nelson and Waylon Jennings. Newbury proved it could be done. But Newbury wasn't finished. Looks Like Rain was just the beginning of his masterpiece trilogy. He followed it up in 1971 with Frisco, Mabel, Joy. It was another concept album, this time telling the fragmented story of a doomed love affair. It was even more ambitious, a cinematic tapestry of song and sound. And on that album was a piece of music that would change his life and the life of Elvis Presley forever. It was called An American Trilogy. It wasn't a song he wrote from scratch. It was an arrangement, a stroke of genius in collage. Newbury had a deep love for the history of American music, for the old songs that carried the weight of the nation's soul. He took 3 songs from the 19th century, Dixie, the anthem of the Confederacy, filled with a painful, complicated nostalgia, the battle hymn of the Republic, the marching song of the Union Army, a call for righteousness and freedom, and All My Trials, a beautiful, sorrowful Bahamian lullaby that had become a spiritual, speaking to the endurance of suffering. Individually, these songs represented division, conflict, and pain. Dixie and the battle hymn were musical symbols of the Civil War, the nation's deepest wound. But Newbury, with the heart of a poet, saw a deeper connection. He wove them together. He started with the gentle hope of All My Trials, then moved into the yearning of Dixie, and finally exploded into the soaring, majestic glory of the battle hymn of the Republic. By combining them, he transformed them. He created a new piece of music that wasn't about the North or the South, but about America itself. It was a prayer for reconciliation, a musical acknowledgement of the country's fractured, painful, but ultimately shared history. It was a song about healing. When he performed it, the experience was quiet, intense, and deeply moving. One night in late 1971, Elvis Presley was in Las Vegas preparing for his show. Someone played him Mickey Newbury's version of An American Trilogy. Elvis was stopped in his tracks. This was at a time when he was searching for material with more substance and depth. He was no longer the rebellious kid from the 50s. He was a man grappling with his own legacy and his own country. The song spoke directly to his Southern roots and his patriotic heart. He reportedly listened to it over and over and decided he had to perform it. In 1972, Elvis debuted his version. It was pure Elvis, grandiose, operatic, and utterly spellbinding. Backed by a full orchestra and a gospel choir, He turned Newbury's quiet meditation into a monumental anthem. It became a centerpiece of his live shows, a showstopper that brought audiences to their feet. The 1973 Aloha from Hawaii television special broadcast Elvis's performance to over 1 billion people worldwide. Suddenly, Mickey Newbury's name was attached to one of the biggest songs in the world. He had given the king one of his last and greatest signature tunes. The royalties poured in. This was his chance to be a superstar, to cash in, to finally join the ranks of the giants he admired. And he did the most Mickey Newbury thing imaginable. He walked away. The success of an American Trilogy gave him something more valuable than fame. It gave him freedom. He had seen the music industry up close, and he wanted no part of the celebrity circus. He hated the endless touring, the fake smiles, the demand to repeat yourself over and over again. He was a creator, not a performer. His friend, the legendary songwriter Townes Van Zandt, was a man who lived his tragic songs, eventually succumbing to his demons. Newbury saw that path and consciously chose another. He once said, "I was never a singer. I was never a performer. I was a writer. When I got to the point where I could make a living as a writer, I had no desire to be on a stage." This wasn't a pose, it was the core of his being. He was painfully shy, suffering from stage fright that he often masked with a quiet, stoic presence. The stage was a place of anxiety. His houseboat was a place of peace. So he used his newfound financial security to double down on his independence. He completed his trilogy in 1973 with Heaven Help the Child, another critically acclaimed, commercially quiet masterpiece. Then he did something truly radical. He went back to the record labels that owned his early work and bought his own master tapes. This was almost unheard of. An artist's masters are their legacy, and labels almost never give them up. But Newbury was persistent. He wanted to own his soul, every last note. By the mid-70s, he had largely vanished from the public eye. He moved from the houseboat in Tennessee to a new refuge, a secluded home in the woods of Oregon. He and his wife Susan raised their children far from the glare of Nashville or Hollywood. He continued to write and record albums on his own terms, for his own small label, releasing them with little to no promotion. They were beautiful, introspective works, but you had to be looking for them to find them. He had become a ghost, a myth. This leads to the central paradox of Mickey Newbury's life. Why is he not a household name? There was no dramatic scandal, no public flameout. His controversy was his quiet refusal to play the game. In a world that measures success by record sales, celebrity status, and visibility, Newbury's career might look like a failure to some. He had the talent to be as big as anyone, but he chose not to. Some in the industry might have seen it as arrogance, a stubborn refusal to meet them halfway. Why wouldn't he tour to support his albums? Why did he make music that was so difficult to categorize and sell? They saw a man who was sabotaging his own career, but his friends and fellow artists saw it differently. They saw a man of immense integrity. Kris Kristofferson famously said, "He was probably the best of all of us, and he's the one that nobody ever heard of." Waylon Jennings, another outlaw pioneer, respected Newbury immensely. He recorded several of Newbury's songs, including the haunting San Francisco Mabel Joy. For Waylon, who fought his own battles with the Nashville establishment, Newbury was a trailblazer, the one who first showed that an artist could take control. But even Waylon understood the trade-off. To become a legend like Waylon or Willie, you had to stay in the ring. You had to tour. You had to do the interviews. You had to be a star. Newbury simply refused. His life in Oregon was quiet, but not without its struggles. He suffered from chronic health problems for years. In the late 1990s, he was diagnosed with pulmonary fibrosis, a terminal lung disease that made it progressively harder for him to breathe, let alone sing. Yet, even in the face of this, he maintained his quiet dignity and his creative spark. There's a little-known, heartbreakingly beautiful fact from this period. Knowing his time was short, he wanted to leave a final gift for his wife. He recorded one last album, A Long Road Home, released in 2002. His voice is frail, weathered by illness, but the emotion is more potent than ever. It's the sound of a man looking back on his life with no regrets, only a deep, abiding love. It's a final whispered masterpiece from the quiet man in the woods. He passed away later that year, at the age of 62. He died as he had lived, on his own terms, at home, surrounded by the nature and the family he cherished more than any spotlight. So, what is the legacy of this forgotten man? What is his significance today? It's not found in gold records or stadium tours. It's found in the quiet corners of music, in the very DNA of what we now call Americana or alt country. His idea of using sound effects and creating a seamless, atmospheric album experience can be seen as a precursor to the ambitious concept albums of the 70s and beyond. His commitment to the song as a piece of literature, a poem set to music, raised the bar for every songwriter who came after him. His direct influence is staggering. We've talked about Elvis and Kristofferson, but the list goes on. Waylon Jennings, Willie Nelson, Johnny Cash, Joan Baez, Ray Charles, Roy Orbison, Nick Cave. The list of artists who have recorded Mickey Newbury songs is a hall of fame in itself. He was the songwriter's songwriter, the master the masters looked up to. His greater significance, though, is a moral one. It's a lesson about the nature of success and the price of integrity. Mickey Newbury's story asks us a profound question. What does it mean to be a successful artist? Is it about fame, money, and recognition? Or is it about creating something true, something that will last, something that is uncompromisingly yours? Newbury chose the latter. He traded worldly success for artistic freedom, public adoration for private peace. He won a much harder battle than the one for the top of the charts. He won the battle for his own soul. In the end, Mickey Newbury is not a tragic figure. He is not a failure. He is a quiet triumph. He lived the life he wanted to live and made the music he needed to make. His story is a powerful reminder that the loudest voice isn't always the most important one. Sometimes the most profound truths are whispered. The ghost who gave Elvis one of his greatest anthems never sought the spotlight, but the light he created continues to shine, illuminating a path for anyone who believes that art should serve truth, not commerce. His music is still there, waiting to be discovered. It sounds like the rain falling on an old houseboat, like a train whistle in the distance, like the honest, weary voice of a poet who saw the world with heartbreaking clarity. All you have to do is listen,